I was the most feared duke in 3 counties on the night I chose her, and I want you to understand what that means. It does not mean I was cruel. It means I was silent where other men were loud, and still where other men performed. It means that when I entered the assembly rooms of Merwick on that October evening, the crowd parted without my asking, and no one met my eyes directly unless I invited them to. I had held the title of Ashvern for 11 years by then. I had learned early that the room always watches the man at the top of the stairs, and I had learned to use that silence like a language. What no one in that room understood, on that particular evening, was that I had spent the better part of 6 months using it to watch someone else. Her name was Ivy Marsh. Her father was a cobbler on the south lane of Merwick Village, a quiet, steady man whose shop smelled of leather and beeswax, and whose daughter had inherited his steadiness without a trace of his obscurity. She was not obscure. She simply was not rich, which in the world of the autumn assembly amounted to the same crime. She had come that night in a gown of pale green wool that was clean and carefully pressed but not silk, and I knew from the precise way she held herself near the door that the slippers on her feet were borrowed. I knew this because I had seen the woman she borrowed them from pass her in the lane 2 days before, pressing the parcel into her hands with a whispered word and a quick embrace, and I had watched Ivy Marsh stand in the lane afterward, holding the parcel against her chest, with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and the particular dignity of a woman who does not wish to be seen needing anything. 6 months I had watched her. I say this plainly because it is the truth, and I am no longer interested in softening truths that I was too reserved to speak when they might have mattered sooner. I had first seen her in April, at the lending library on Church Street, where she was returning a volume of natural philosophy and picking up 2 more, and where the librarian, old Mr. Fenwick, had stopped her at the desk and asked, in the way of old men who feel the cold more than they once did, whether she might possibly reach the high shelf for him and retrieve a specific catalog he could not safely climb for. She had set her books down without hesitation, climbed the rolling ladder in her everyday dress, found the catalog by spine alone, third from the left, cream binding with a red ribbon, exactly as he described, and handed it down to him. Then she had stayed another 10 minutes, without being asked, reorganizing the top shelf so that the volumes he needed most often were within his reach without the ladder. She did not know I was there. I had stepped into the alcove nearest the door for no reason I can now explain except instinct, and I watched the whole of it from behind a copy of Blackstone's commentaries that I was not reading. When she left, she nodded to Mr. Fenwick with the ease of long familiarity, tucked her books under her arm, and walked out into the April rain without hurrying. I thought about that for 3 weeks. I returned to the library twice during that period, on pretexts that would not have fooled a careful observer, and on neither occasion was she there, and I was, though I would not have admitted this to anyone at the time, disappointed in a way that felt disproportionate to the absence of a woman I had not yet spoken to. I began to notice her after that, the way you notice a fixed point when everything else in a room is moving. She was at the market on Tuesdays. She read on the bench outside the apothecary while waiting for her father's tincture. She gave her seat at the lending library to a woman with an infant, without appearing to think about it. She spoke to people at the lower end of Merwick's particular social ladder, the baker's assistant, the lamplighter, old Mrs. Holt, who was considered strange by the village and therefore avoided by nearly everyone, with the same unhurried attention she gave to anyone else. It was not performance. I had attended enough assemblies and enough drawing rooms in my 11 years as the Duke of Ashvern to know the difference between a person performing goodness and a person simply doing it. Ivy Marsh was simply doing it. She had no audience. She did not look around to see who had noticed. She would have done every single one of those things in an empty lane, and the result would have been identical. By October, I had made my decision. I had not yet told anyone, including myself, in so many words, but the decision was made. What I had not anticipated was that the Countess of Felmore would give me my moment before I had chosen mine. The Countess arrived at the assembly rooms that evening in ivory satin, and her habitual expression of gracious contempt, which she distributed with the impartiality of rainfall across everyone below her particular rung of the social ladder. She was not a wicked woman in the grand theatrical sense. She was simply a woman who had spent 60 years in a world that rewarded the performance of superiority, and she had become very, very good at it. She spotted Ivy Marsh within the first quarter hour, near the punch table, speaking with the clockmaker's wife, another person the assembly generally managed not to see, and she crossed the room with the unhurried certainty of someone who has never once in her life worried about whether her opinion was wanted. I was at the gallery rail. I saw all of it. "Miss Marsh," the Countess's voice carried. It was designed to. "How very determined you are. Every year, the same pale gown, the same borrowed shoes. One does have to admire the persistence, if not the result." The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent the way a fire goes out, one thing at a time, until there is nothing left but ash and attention. Ivy Marsh looked at the Countess with an expression I had seen once before, on that day in the lane with the borrowed slippers. Gratitude and dignity in careful balance, except that this time, the gratitude was absent, and the dignity was the whole of it. "Good evening, Lady Felmore," she said, quietly, without apology. "Give her to no one," the Countess said, turning to address the room at large, with the lightness of someone making a pleasantry. "She is beneath us all. I say it every year, and every year she returns. One does wonder at the optimism." There was a sound in the room that was not quite laughter, and not quite agreement. It was the sound of a crowd deciding which way to fall. I had heard it before. I knew exactly how long it lasted before it settled into something permanent and unkind. I came down the stairs. I am not a man who moves quickly as a general rule. I find that stillness serves better in most situations, and speed reads as urgency, which reads as vulnerability, and I had spent 11 years ensuring that no one in 3 counties thought of me as vulnerable. But I came down those stairs with enough intention that the crowd read it correctly and stepped back, and I crossed the assembly room floor with the full attention of every title, every second son, every dowager and debutante in the room fixed on my back. I stopped in front of Ivy Marsh. She looked up at me. Her eyes were gray, which I had known for months, and in the candlelight of the assembly rooms, they were the precise color of the sky above Ashvern on a November morning, which I had also known, in a private way, for some time. She did not look frightened. She looked careful and steady and entirely herself, which was the only thing I had ever wanted from any person in any room in my adult life, and had almost never found. "Miss Marsh," I said. "Your Grace," she said. I turned to face the room. The Countess of Felmore had not moved. She was watching me, with the expression of a woman trying to determine whether this was a humiliation or a rescue, and which of those two things would be worse for her own position. "I have been asked," I said, to the room, at a volume that required no effort to carry, many times in these 11 years, why I have not chosen a wife from among the assembled company of this county's finest families. I have declined to answer that question at every assembly, at every dinner, and in every letter from every matchmaking relation I possess, and I have declined because the answer was not yet complete. The room was absolutely still. "It is complete now." I looked at Ivy Marsh. "Miss Marsh, I wonder if you will do me the considerable honor of the next dance." It was not a proposal. That came later, in my study at Ashvern Hall, 3 evenings hence, in private, with no audience, and no gallery, and no Countess of Felmore, because Ivy Marsh was not a woman who deserved to be proposed to in front of a crowd, and I was not a man who confused a public statement with an intimate one. The dance was the statement, the proposal was the truth. But the room did not know that yet, and what the room heard, what every title, every second son, every whispering widow heard, was the word complete. They heard me look at a cobbler's daughter in borrowed slippers and say that the answer to the 11-year question of the Duke of Ashvern was standing in front of them, and they could make of that what they wished. The Countess of Felmore made nothing of it. She had nothing left to make. The thing she had held, the pleasant cruelty of the publicly diminished woman, had been lifted from her hands so quietly and so completely that there was no moment she could point to as the one where it happened. It had simply gone. Ivy Marsh looked at me for a long moment. There was nothing in her expression that resembled rescue. There was something in it that resembled recognition, the particular recognition of 2 people who have each, in their private way, been paying attention. "I would be glad to, Your Grace," she said. We danced. The room watched. No one said anything unkind for the remainder of the evening, which in the assembly rooms of Merwick constituted something very close to a miracle. 3 evenings later, in my study, with the fire going, and the November rain on the windows, and no one present but the two of us, I told her what I have just told you. The library, the ladder, the April rain, the 6 months of watching a woman do good things in empty lanes, because goodness was simply her nature, and not her performance. She listened to all of it without interrupting me, which was also her nature. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You watched me return library books." "Among other things," I said. "For 6 months. Nearly 7, by October." She looked at the fire. I could not read her expression with any certainty, which was new for me. I had spent 11 years reading rooms. She was not a room. She was something I did not yet know how to read, which was precisely why I wanted to spend the rest of my life learning. "Why didn't you speak to me sooner?" she asked. "I wasn't certain yet," I said. "Certain of what?" "That I was worthy of someone like you," I said. "It takes time to be sure of a thing like that." She turned from the fire and looked at me then, with the gray eyes and the November morning expression, and for the first time in 11 years, I was glad I had never learned to be quick. We were married in December, in the village church of St. Edmund's, with the cobbler's daughter in ivory silk and the Duke of Ashvern in his best coat. Mr. Fenwick, the librarian, was given a seat in the 3rd pew. Old Mrs. Holt, who the village considered strange, was given a seat in the 2nd. The Countess of Felmore sent a very correct letter of congratulation, which my Duchess received with exactly the same unhurried, steady courtesy she gave to everyone. In the years that followed, people would ask me, at dinners and assemblies and the occasional letter from a cousin, what the reason was. What had I seen in a cobbler's daughter that I could not find in the assembled daughters of the county's finest families? They expected something grand, a hidden inheritance perhaps, a secret talent, a revelation. I told them the truth every time. I told them that I had watched a woman spend 6 months being kind to people who could give her nothing in return, in lanes and libraries and market squares where no one was watching, and that I had decided, quietly and without announcement, that this was the rarest thing I had ever seen in my 11 years as the Duke of Ashvern. They were always surprised. I never understood why. It seemed to me the only reason worth the kingdom's shock.